Entering the Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings. A change of pace for the Pat Mayo Experience. I think for the first time in 6-7 years, we're doing a college football preview. I got the Jonesin to get some future bets in, so I need to get some future bets. Unfortunately, I'm not going to listen to myself for any college basketball. That's how unfluent I am. College football future bets, be it on conferences, long shots, win totals, whatever it might be. I don't know. I need to bring someone on to talk about all this stuff. So, rate, review, and subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Smash like and sub to the channel while you're here. And welcome in from the Burning the Red Shirt podcast, a contributor to the Unabated for college football, Chris Kay. What's going on, my man?
Not much. I'm doing kind of a little bit of a podcast or radio tour. I'm calling it just because week 0 of college football is here. Everybody's trying to talk more and more about it, and I'm trying to talk more about it too. I love the season's coming up. I love what we're doing at Unabated, and so I'm willing to go out and talk to anybody these days that'll listen to me.
That's right. You're scumming the earth right now talking to me. I'm not going to lie to you.
Well, someone's got to do it, So I'm not beneath that, that's for sure. But excited to chat with you a little bit and see what we can come up with today in terms of some futures for you.
All right, cool. I'm just going to write these down. I'll probably bet them as we go. DraftKings Sportsbook is where you should be placing your sports bets, by the way, for anyone out there who didn't know that. Additionally, if you're into the NFL, which I hear a lot of people are, not only do I have a litany of NFL content out right now with more very much on the way. Good shows, too. Win totals, win total drafts, how to bet, DraftKings preview, all that fun stuff is coming very soon on Mayo Media Network and the Pat Mayo Experience. However, if you want to build season-long fantasy projections to bet some, let's say, over-under player props for the year, runthesims.com is completely free for those projections, completely customizable to make your own rankings and see the projections for the season. However, if you want the tools for daily fantasy or for prop betting or for whatever it is, it's all tools. Runthesims.com, code MAYO, get you 10% off for the year. The annual deal is where it's at. Highly suggest you check it out. I was up like 20K last year on DraftKings, and I suck at DraftKings. All thanks to runthesims.com. Code Mayo. All right, where do you want to start with this, Chris? Do you want to start with the ACC? You want to start with the SEC? Because is the SEC still like the conference, at least for this season, before there's like one mega conference or whatever the hell I can piece together with what's going on with the NCAA?
Yeah, this is a hard time for college people not super familiar with college football to join in because it's about to get real crazy. But yeah, let's start SEC. They're really the cream de la cream, the best options, the best teams. And honestly, I tried to come up with who I think would win, and then a kind of a long shot bet to kind of, everybody likes a longer shot play, a bigger money. Couldn't do it with SEC. I think Georgia's just so incredibly talented. Their recruiting classes consistently are amazing. Their coaching staff is incredible. It's not often you get a team that has to replace their quarterback. Stetson Bennett's gone after the last couple of seasons there. He played great in those championship runs. But it doesn't matter. They just have so much talent on all sides of the ball. And they also play in the SEC East, which is significantly weaker compared to the West, giving them kind of a leg up and getting to the championship game maybe a little bit easier, a little bit more or less unscathed. So I like Georgia to be the champion. I don't see another team in that conference that like realistically has some nice long shot odds. I think like LSU's odds are a little bit juicier, but in the West, that's a very competitive division, and they'd have to, ultimately beat Georgia in the championship game. Pretty tough task to have there to have to beat them there at the end of the season. So I like Georgia to win the conference, not really too crazy of a call. And I'm avoiding a long shot bet here. It's just they're just too good. It's just, I don't see a world where they don't win the conference.
So you have Georgia, they're minus 115 at DraftKings Sportsbook right now. And you mentioned Alabama, you mentioned LSU, they're 3-1, 4.5-1. And then there's a severe drop off to Tennessee. So Georgia's toughest game just throughout the season is going to be against Tennessee, right?
Yeah, it's at Tennessee, which will be a little interesting. They have Bazooka Joe, as I call him, Joe Milton, the former Michigan transfer that got beat out by Hendon Hooker, and then now is presumably taken the job. He's a little hit or miss. He could be absolutely incredible. He could lose the job by week 6. Then after that, you have a home game against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss has notoriously started off strong, and then it kind of faded into the sun at the end of the season. So I don't consider really either of those two teams all that competitive and really going to challenge them this year.
All right, so right now in the preseason AP poll, there are 3 SEC teams inside the top 5. Let's say Georgia wins, we cash our bet at -115. That's amazing. I enjoy winning bets. What are the chances either basically LSU or Alabama ends up in the college football playoffs?
I think it's possible either one could make it just because of the strength of the conference. And I think that team would likely be LSU. Jaden Daniels returns. They have a good core of running backs and some solid receivers as well to go along with a really good defense. But, it's just tough for me to be behind Alabama when they kind of had a 3-man competition at quarterback. Now it's a 2-man competition. Both options seem very bleak. And they don't have kind of the big hitter names at the other skill positions to kind of make up for what could be a potentially just average quarterback. And LSU has to play Alabama, then they'd have to beat Georgia. So that's the hard part, is they automatically each have 2 very difficult games they have to win to be an SEC winner.
Right. And you could have a thing where, I don't know, where LSU beats Alabama, yet somehow Alabama can sneak into the game. Then you have a bunch of teams with 1 loss. If Alabama wins that, then it's just a complete shit show, isn't it?
Yeah, you get the whole 3-man kind of weird ties and that type of thing. LSU has a really great first game against FSU, great for fans, very difficult for themselves. So FSU and LSU have this rare situation where they're really top 5, top 10 teams, but they play each other at the beginning. So if whoever loses almost has to win out to then make the playoff, which will be interesting. I think FSU has a way more likely shot at doing that than LSU does, but it'll be a really good game at the very least, beginning of the season to entertain us.
Is that the strategy, though? Like, a loss to a good team at the beginning of the year is obviously, much better to lose in the end of August, early September than have that same game at the end of October and lose that one?
I think there's some money that comes into play, right? They want to produce some big dollars for the programs, but it is also very nice to lose early rather than late. Teams tend to forget, those rankers tend to forget the early loss as long as it's someone respectable. Georgia and Oregon played at the beginning of last year. And if we didn't see a Bo Nix injury towards the end of the season, they would have totally been in play to make the playoff with 1 loss, potentially 2. Just if they would have won the division and then beaten USC with Caleb Williams as the Heisman Trophy winner, that would have been a big win for them. But yeah, lose early is typically the way to do it. And then when we get expanded playoffs, I think we'll see some more competitive early games because there's more room for error as well.
When is the extended playoffs going to come in?
2024. So this is the last year. So it kind of coincides with all the different conferences mixing things up. So we'll see the new style next year in 2024. But what's interesting is with all this shakeup, the Pac-12, now the Pac-4 technically has like an automatic bid. So what does the playoff committee do there? So there's some potential rumblings that they kind of change things around of how that is formatted, but that won't begin until 2024.
So who will be left in, I guess, what is now called the Pac-12, which will be the Pac-4?
So it's Cal, Stanford, Washington State, and Oregon State. Those are like the 4 teams looking for a home. So there's, ACC's been talked about grabbing Stanford and Cal, which makes about as much sense as you can try to think of. It just doesn't. And then Oregon State and Washington State, those are 2 rabid fan bases that just might get left out in the cold, unfortunately. And the thought is, does the Mountain West kind of absorb some of those teams? Do they take the best from the Mountain West and the best from the AAC and combine with those Pac-4 teams? So it's interesting. We're certainly a 4-conference team or a 4-conference type of league in a year, but things won't be stopping for the next year in this realignment era.
Do you like the realignment, or is it just like everyone else who was a fan of one of these teams, like, this is just absolute bullshit, like I can't follow what's going on?
I like it. All the teams that I follow are in a safe space. They don't have to worry. I follow a couple different teams, and they're all good. I'm a Michigan fan. I'm a Virginia Tech graduate, and I have Auburn season tickets. All those teams are safe. Tech maybe the least safe. It is a tough shake for all the non-football sports, and even you could put basketball. Basketball is probably pretty safe there. But it's like the softball, the baseball, the swimming, all these different smaller teams are really getting, I don't know, kind of getting the short end of the stick because their travel and all that type of stuff is going to be crazy and just not feasible. We probably you'll see some different teams and programs go away because it's just not financially there. But from a football perspective, I love it because it just creates more better games. Everybody loves seeing Georgia play Bama and Michigan play Ohio State, but now we get like Michigan, USC, and Wisconsin, UCLA, some of these bigger matchups that we probably wouldn't have seen without any sort of realignment.
Yeah, there's, I guess, pre-realignment, and even we'll see this year within conference play when you have the dregs of each conference. It's kind of like when I used to watch wrestling in the early 90s and I'd watch WWF Superstars, and you would never see anyone good take on each other. That was exclusively on pay-per-view. It'd be like Hulk Hogan against the Brooklyn Brawler and crap like this, or just some random enhancement guy where his name, like John Hart, is taking on, I don't know, Bret Hart this week, and Bret Hart is just going to stomp a mud hole in this guy, and you really know what the outcome is going to be. At least this way, it's kind of like when WCW was on the rise, and all of a sudden they're putting real matches on that forced the WWF to put these, and all of a sudden we're getting like Triple H against The Rock on Monday Night Raw. I'm kind of digging this as someone who's a bit of a lapsed college football fan. I mean, part of it is there's just way too many games for me to try and follow and at least feel like I have an edge on to try to bet on or to play daily fantasy on any given Saturday. But at least if you give me a few marquee matchups, I can just bet on those games like an absolute square and lose all my money.
Yeah, this will be great for bettors or anybody that wants to find some juice on some of these games because there's just going to be bigger primetime lights on some of these matchups. And, you get less 28-0 in the first quarter type games when you have this type of thing on ABC primetime. The only other negative I can think of to this is kind of this regional issue where some of your rivals are going to be much more difficult to schedule because, like, for instance, Oregon's now in the Big Ten. Oregon State is in like an area where we have no idea where they're going to go. Like, so how difficult will it be for them to schedule each other, and what departments are going to be okay to do that? That was like a big Texas A&M thing is when A&M went to the SEC, that kind of rivalry stopped. And those fans are absolutely crazy when it comes to those matchups. And we lost that. And with Texas going to the SEC now as well, we'll see that again, which will be nice. But there was maybe like a 10 or 15 year gap where we just didn't get A&M against Texas, which I can understand why people are pretty bummed out about situations like that.
Is it written in stone that if you transfer divisions in football that the whole school has to follow? Like, how did Notre Dame get away with being an independent in football, yet they could be in the Big East for basketball?
Well, I think Notre Dame's its own special beast here. So Notre Dame can do pretty much whatever they want. They're an independent in football, but when it comes to all the other sports, they are ACC affiliated. And it all stems from TV contracts. They don't have to split up their contract with NBC. It's Notre Dame, so any program, like any different ESPN, ABC, all these guys would love a Notre Dame game, right? Like, that's a program that's going to have tickets sold, that people are going to watch the games. So their TV contract is always astronomical, right? And then they don't have to share it. So it is funny how they got away with it. And they even play some ACC games each year, but they aren't a part of the ACC. It's really rare, but it is funny how that's worked out for Notre Dame, and it's worked out in their favor for sure.
So it's just a Notre Dame clause. Like, it would make sense, like if you say some of these like women's softball or water polo or whatever the hell sport that's not getting a ton of funding, especially for travel, that, hey, we'll do this for basketball and football, but like we can keep like the regular Pac-12 for all the sports that no one cares about.
Yeah, it's strictly, you don't see this any sort of intermingling of conferences. Maybe on like Villanova, those types where their other programs are maybe D3 or D2 or something like that. You'd see that, but Notre Dame's really the only program that does anything like that within the FBS level.
Well, I don't want to talk about Notre Dame, except for the fact that I hope that they're terrible this year. Are they going to be terrible this year? Because that's like one of my two rooting interests in college football.
No, they won't be terrible. They'll probably win 8 to 9 games. They have Sam Hartman, which is a really fun transfer from Wake Forest. If you haven't heard about him and his 2022 season, you should. Essentially, he had like a late rib injury that caused them to remove a rib, and he's throwing for 300 plus.
He pulled like a Marilyn Manson and got his ribs removed.
It was some I don't know about that, but he had some sort of rib injury that caused him to sit out, and then all of a sudden he's back out of nowhere, and he's just incredible. So that's a fun one, fun player to root for. But I'm too kind of on the anti Notre Dame side, but they'll be decent. 8-9 wins. They don't have any true skill players that pop out. No like crazy NFL prospects besides some offensive linemen like they typically do. And they do tend to play a somewhat difficult schedule because they do always play USC, and they play some other different random independent. I shouldn't say independent, just different teams throughout the different conferences that are fairly competitive,
like Army and Navy and those teams.
Well, Navy beat them a little while back, it felt like, but that's been many years ago. Let's see who they got. They play Stanford. I know that they play some different random teams here and there. Ohio State they play this year, so we can hopefully bank on that one there. Louisville, Duke, and they get the at Clemson this year. So some of those ACC games present a little bit of a challenge too.
Let's talk about the Pac-12, since this is the last year that we're likely to be seeing this collection of teams in this conference. USC is currently the favorite, but you like Oregon, don't you?
Yeah, I'm one of the OG Bo Nix believers, and for a long time that was a pretty tough life I lived. He goes to Oregon, was phenomenal for them last year, gets hurt late, and it truly impacted how their offense looked. He should be back and completely healthy in 2023. Pac-12 is the rare situation where everyone's pretty much got a pretty difficult schedule. You can see some of these different conferences and you see, okay, well, this team avoids so-and-so and this team avoids so-and-so, right? So not the case in the Pac-12. Oregon gets, let's see here, they get USC and Oregon State, two difficult matchups, but they're at home. They do have to travel to Utah, I think fairly early, and then Washington. So 4 tough games, 2 of them at home is not too bad. And I'm not on Utah this year. And the earlier anybody plays Utah this year, I think the better, because there are some serious question marks. And ultimately, I'm just not a believer of USC. I think their defense is just not good enough to cut it. In teams like Washington, Oregon, Utah, when healthy, like they have all really good offenses and very, at the very least, average to decent defenses. So that'll make it pretty tough for USC to win the Pac-12 this year.
I guess their path would just be, we're going to score 70 points every game and try to outscore us.
Yeah, which typically does not work. I mean, if there's anybody that's going to do it this year, it's USC. Their offense is incredible. They have 4 legitimate receivers, and then you add in 1 or 2 freshmen that are incredible. You have 2 great, capable running backs, and then a freshman that's awesome. It's just truly a matter of, does their defense improve at all? And if it does, we should see some significant increase in how they perform. But, there's just wasn't a ton of movement to that defense this offseason. That makes me think they're going to be that much better, if any.
So they're coming in number 6 to start the year overall inside the country, and they're just below 2-1 to win the Pac-12 right now. If they got like a middling performance from their defense, like slightly below average, would that be good enough for them? Just don't be terrible?
Yeah, I think if they get that, they're automatically going to win 10 games because they're going to probably average 40 plus a game offensively. It's just a matter of, do they show up in the games that matter? The Oregon game, the Washington game. If the defense can just play adequate in those games, it turns everything around, because Washington and Oregon are also going to score 35 to 40 points a game. and their defenses have been, in the last 5-10 years, significantly better.
Is it tough to trust either Oregon or Oregon State, knowing that all of their players are incapable of pumping their own gas?
That's a good question. I thought that was just Jersey. Is Jersey like that too, or is it Oregon? I don't venture out to the West Coast, so
yeah, it's Jersey and Oregon. I don't get it.
I wish I would have known that before putting this together, but I do like Oregon State as well. So maybe their lack of having to pump gas is a positive.
That's a good spin. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, they're not wasting that valuable energy and inertia pumping their own gas, just sitting around. And you're never going to have a situation where they tell you not to use your cell phones when you're pumping your gas. That, if I was 20 years old, I wouldn't listen to that sign. I had my cell phone out pumping my gas, and who knows what could happen at that point. So low risk of injury at the gas station for these Oregon teams. But you like Oregon State as your long shot in the Pac-12.
I do. I think it all starts with their head coach. I believe it's Jonathan Smith. Incredible background at Boise State and Washington. He's been super successful turning around Oregon State. They have a good quarterback. They have DJU. It's kind of weird to say that, but I think DJU has kind of turned a corner. We might see a little bit of some Bo Nix type situation where high level recruit underperforms, goes to a new scenery, little bit less stress, and he performs at a much higher rate. They got an incredible sophomore running back, Damian Martinez, and formidable receivers. The defense is stout, as stout as it can be in the Pac-12. So I like it. I think their head coach mixed with a capable quarterback, considering their odds, is a pretty interesting bet. They get Washington and Utah at home, which is nice. And so, I like them as a long shot because I do think they have some of the different pieces you need to surprise a team or surprise a conference.
Let's move to the Big Ten. And when you take a look at the overall rankings, Michigan is number 2, Ohio State is number 3. So is it going to come down to these two again?
I think it'll come down to 3 teams: Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. We might get the weird trifecta of like Michigan beat Ohio State beat Penn State beat Michigan type situation, where then it gets into a pretty weird tiebreaker, if I remember correctly. But yeah, those 3 teams are really pretty strong. The reason why I like Michigan the most is, even with my bias, they return their quarterback, they return their 2 best skilled players, their offensive line is incredible, their defense remains super stout. It's going to be a top 10, top 15 defense. And they get Ohio State at home. So 2 big things there is they get Ohio State at home, which is great for Harbaugh and the Wolverines. They get Penn State on the road, but Penn State made the bold decision to not do their crazy whiteout for that game. So that's a noon game, which, if you've ever watched a Penn State night game, those things are crazy, huge advantage, and Michigan somehow avoided that. So I'm a huge Michigan fan to win that conference.
All right, so Iowa is 12-1. So if it's not going to be one of the big 3, why would it be Iowa?
Oh man, this is like the one that makes me like squirm. Like I feel bad. Like I told someone I was going to say this out loud and they told me to like leave and that they might fire me. But their schedule works enough. They get Penn State on the road, which is difficult, and Wisconsin on the road, which might be easier than it seems. They avoid Michigan and Ohio State, and they're on the West Division. So it's kind of one of those situations where they're going to get to the dance, probably. Like they're more than likely, in my opinion, going to be in that conference championship game. And then all it takes is one day, right? One good game. Some of the different pieces there I like are a good young running back, Cade McNamara, who won the Big Ten with Michigan years ago as their quarterback, which is just going to elevate their offense. I mean, their offense has been truly the worst thing ever the last 5 years.
So basically, it just comes down to you're betting 12-1 on Iowa that they can get past Wisconsin and pull out a fluke in the championship game. I mean, that's a pretty viable path because if they get to that game, then they're going to be what, 3-1 underdogs, 4-1 underdogs? And it seems like a pretty good price if you can get it.
Yeah, and I think their skill players I mean, their defense is always going to be incredible, right? Like their defense is probably going to score a touchdown a game type thing. They'll be that good. So, if that offense can elevate themselves a little bit, I don't think they beat Michigan, Ohio State, but like I've seen crazier things happen, and all it takes is one weird injury or one kind of breakout performance from a player on Iowa, and all of a sudden that's a really appealing bet to me because they do have such an easy route to the championship game.
Why Iowa over Wisconsin?
So Wisconsin to me is they have such turnover with their offense this year. They're not going to be so defense heavy as they used to be, and they're going to spread the ball around and pass a lot more. They got a guy, Tanner Mordecai, in there. I'm not a huge Mordecai fan. It is certainly a much better option compared to what they've had in years past, but he still struggles in so he was the quarterback at SMU. You may remember him because he had 9 touchdown passes against Houston last year, but he disappears in some of these difficult matchups. And anytime it's raining or it's cold, he kind of gets even worse, right? So that's not the best place to go to if you're not great in bad weather, Wisconsin. So I don't consider Wisconsin on the road a super tough matchup, especially when Iowa isn't, they're not flashy. They appeal to they do well in the snow, that type of cold weather. So they're not going to be fazed by it. I think Wisconsin needs a year or two before their offense becomes really an asset for them to go on top of what will be for sure a strong defense.
Big 12, Texas is even money as the favorite in the Big 12 right now. Oklahoma's plus 350, Kansas State's 5-1, Texas Tech 10-1, TCU, Baylor 16-18. Then there's a significant drop off down to Kansas and then UCF and places like that. So would you go Texas or Oklahoma?
I am an Oklahoma guy this year. I think quarterback play is so big in college football, and we saw that with them last year. They lost Dylan Gabriel, and it was like the offense just became 100 times worse. He's a former UCF quarterback that's had a really great college career. Without him, Texas crushed them. They never had a chance. They had a lot of close losses. I think it was 4 losses by 3 points and 1 by 7. And their schedule obviously is going to be appealing. They play TCU at home, which I like TCU, but I don't think they're super scary for me. Like if I'm Oklahoma, I feel good against TCU. Then of course they play Texas on the neutral field, the Red River rivalry, like they always do. So I think the schedule lines up for them well, and I think as long as Dylan Gabriel stays upright, that'll be a really good offense. And a good enough defense to win the conference.
So if it's not Oklahoma, it's not Texas. If we want to go down the board to try to find someone that could potentially upset in this conference, where would you be looking?
Yeah, so I got 2 ones here. I made up for the SEC with this. So TCU, I said they don't scare me too much, but right out of the gate, we'll know if TCU can contend because it'll be Chandler Morris at quarterback. How good of an option is he for them? This Sonny Dykes offense is going to produce receivers and skill players that will perform and produce really well. They need a quarterback. So Chandler Morris actually beat out Max Duggan last year. Then he got hurt, and then he just never got the job back. And we saw what Max Duggan did. He went to the Heisman Trophy ceremony and almost won that. So I think we'll know pretty early if TCU is going to compete for it. I think at the number plus 1,600, that's a decent bet to me. I think even longer of a shot is Central Florida in their first year in the Big 12, and it goes back to quarterback play. John Rice Plumlee, if you haven't heard of him, he's one of the most exciting players in college football. He's a star baseball player for them, and obviously star quarterback for them. If you need to look it up, it's pretty great. He was playing a baseball game for UCF. They helicoptered him out to the spring football game so he could play in that, like at the 8th inning or something like that. So incredible talent. And the big thing that's underrated for them is they have Gus Malzahn as their head coach. Incredible recruiter. He's gotten a ton of great transfers from other P5 programs to go to UCF, which is a little surprising considering, UCF is or was a G5 team. And he knows how to win in these big conferences. He was at Auburn in the SEC, and they performed really quite well with him there. So I like kind of his leadership there. And then, of course, looking at the schedule, they play at Oklahoma, at Kansas State, but they avoid Texas and TCU. So they do have a pretty appealing schedule from that standpoint as well.
Okay. So I guess we just have the ACC to talk about. Is the ACC outside? I mean, is Clemson still amazing, or are they just falling back a little bit right now? It's either number 9 coming into the year. Florida State is number 8 coming into the year. So does it just come down to one of those two teams?
Yeah, I think it's truly a two-man race. Who's gonna perform more consistently, and it's truly FSU Clemson. So FSU, I'm going with FSU, even though they play at Clemson. Their schedule in its entirety is significantly easier than Clemson's. They avoid NC State, who's typically a strong team. They avoid UNC, who has a very likely top 10 draft pick in Drake May at quarterback. And instead, they play my Virginia Tech Hokies, who are coming off a 2-win season. They play Boston College. So some of these other opponents that Clemson has to face, like Duke, Miami, NC State, and Syracuse, they have to play all those teams on the road, and they're all pretty difficult matchups. So I think FSU's schedule is just so much softer. If you look at the two teams, it's really scary how similar they are. Strong defenses. Should be great quarterback play with Jordan Travis at FSU, and Cade Klubnik at Clemson. Strong running back play with Will Shipley at Clemson and Trey Benson at Florida State. I think Florida State's got a little bit of a leg up on the other skill positions. Their size is incredible. They have a 6'7" receiver in Johnny Wilson. They have a 6'5" receiver in Keon Coleman. Their tight end was a running back for half the year last year at South Carolina. So just a ton of talent and some size advantages, I think will help them win that game at Clemson this year, and then kind of coast through the rest of their conference schedule.
Is there anyone at the back end of the ACC that might have a favorable schedule or could be an injury away from just being in the championship game?
Yeah, I mentioned NC State earlier as a nice team that FSU gets to avoid. And I think they have a strong chance at kind of surprising people. So what's funny is NC State was kind of the hot buzz team in the ACC last year, and they pretty much massively underperformed. FSU is kind of that team this year. FSU has this national title buzz around them. I think that's a little bit premature, but I do think they'll win the ACC. But I think NC State, ironically, is a shocking team, a team that could shock them in the ACC. They have Brendan Armstrong, a 6th-year guy that was at UVA. Now he's at NC State, reuniting with his old offensive coordinator that helped him put up an incredible season 2 years ago. You should look him up. He wants to be, I think it's a WWE wrestler when he graduates. So maybe you'll check him out more in the future years. And they have an old receiver, a strong old receiver one. And NC State's always known for good defenses. So I think this is one of those times where an offensive coordinator like Robert Anaya at NC State will take his talent that he has, Rosner as the receiver and Armstrong as the quarterback, utilize their talents, and then find these younger guys and really maximize what they can do at such an early stage in their career. But their schedule is also favorable as well. Home against Clemson, UNC, Louisville, and Miami, not the craziest of schedule there. And they also get to play my Hokies in Virginia, who are just going to be really, really, really poor teams this year, unfortunately.
So Rosner is a 6th-year wide receiver. Is he in law school or med school?
I think Rosner actually did, not like Stetson. Stetson kind of coasted and never got a degree, but Rosner is a 6th-year guy. I'm fairly positive he graduated. Armstrong is another old guy. I mean, Pat, we go for days on 6th and 7th-year guys. It's just a matter of how much time you have. So,
I mean, I still think that college football should institute my rule that every team can have one legacy player on it. I want to see Tim Tebow be the quarterback at Florida, like in perpetuity, until he gets so old he can't play anymore. But you're not going to the NFL. Hey, hell, you don't want to sell insurance for a living. Just continue to play for our college team. You get to designate one guy every year. It'd be great.
Well, Tebow would be the best quarterback on Florida still. So I think Florida fans too would be wanting that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a bit more problematic for college basketball where there are fewer people on the field at all times or on the court at all times, where you just have this guy who dominates. He wasn't great in the NBA. Let's bring him back. We'll pay him $10 million a year to play for Villanova or whatever it is. At least in football, you could pay the guys like $10 million, whatever you wanted to at this point, and they wouldn't have as big of an impact. I guess if you're a quarterback, you probably would. Anyway, this is what I want to see. Hence why they don't allow me to make decisions for college football. So we've gone over the major conferences. Are there any teams outside of these conferences that you think could make an impact and just be like the random team that's ranked 17th and like on November 17th, yet they're 10-0 somehow?
I think the G5, it will be pretty interesting, always good football, kind of crazy football, but I'm not sure off the top of my head if there's any big time competitors. Coastal Carolina typically puts out a really good team, but their head coach has moved on, and he's such a great offensive mind. Nothing off the top of my head comes to me as some strong competitors from some of the different smaller conferences.
Yeah, even looking at the top 25, usually even in the preseason, you see one or two of them sneak in there, and you just don't. I guess Tulane is really the only one because they're in the American Conference?
AAC, yeah. So they might be Big 12 now. No, they're AAC. It's so hard to keep up with some of these different ones. But yeah, it's all going to come down to quarterback play. So that's a good one, right? Tulane's got Michael Pratt at quarterback. This will be his final year. So they would be probably one of the teams in contention. I really liked UTSA. That's Texas San Antonio. They have an incredible offense with 7th-year quarterback Frank Harris, which another old guy here. Led by Harris, that offense will be really good, and they are in the AAC as well, I believe. And it's just such a weak. These things are really watered down compared to what they used to be. So like the AAC used to be kind of considered that next elite conference, kind of like that 6th one. But they lost Cincinnati, they lost UCF, they lost Houston, all to the Big 12. So that's really become more of a watered down conference. And it wouldn't surprise me if they ran the table. They actually play a couple of really interesting games in the season. Houston, which will be fun. That should be super high scoring. But they also play Tennessee, which if I'm a Tennessee fan, I would certainly not consider that one a locked in win. UTSA has been really productive, and what's only been, I think, like 10 or 15 years of them playing college football, period. So it's been quite impressive of a performance from them.
Well, we've gone through the conferences, the winners, some long shots. I need some win totals for the year. So some ones that I can just sit there, watch as the season goes on, like, oh, we're getting close to this. Or this team started 0-4. Perfect for my under.
Yeah, so Auburn, I'm a season ticket holder. I'm going to go Auburn under. I've seen them too much. They get Hugh Freeze as their head coach, which is a kind of a moral dilemma situation, right? Like Hugh Freeze, if you know his background, it's not great. It's very scandalous. We'll say that'll be a nice way to put it. But he's a great football mind. So kind of a give take there. Problem with them is their schedule is just incredibly difficult. They play UGA, LSU, Alabama, and Texas A&M. That's like, to me, that's 4 losses. And I consider those more surefire, right? They still play teams like Ole Miss, who we talked about as ranked, Cal, Arkansas, Vandy, and Mississippi State. Based on their schedule, they have to win 4 of those, I think 5 games for them to hit the 6.5 number to go over. And so I like the under there. Their quarterback, to put it, I don't think they have the pieces needed yet for the offense that Hugh Freeze brings in. They brought in a pretty immobile quarterback, not crazy immobile. He's not a statue, but he's not a runner. He won the job he was at Michigan State. He won the job at Auburn. Auburn announced this past week, and it's just a bad fit. Like I see a hard time. It's going to be a hard time for them to score consistently. And that team has got 0 depth. They've had some pretty poor recruiting classes. So 1 or 2 injuries in that position could be in total shambles, which is not something you want to bank on in a 12-game season. So I like their under.
You talked about Iowa earlier in the Big Ten as a potential outside shot of getting to the championship game. If they somehow get to the championship game, I'm guessing they went over 8 wins.
Yeah, the thing for them is like we mentioned earlier, right? Their schedule is so soft. To me, they really only have one pretty automatic loss, and that's at Penn State. They have a really soft out of conference schedule, playing Utah State, Western Michigan, and Iowa State, which typically Iowa State is a really difficult matchup. It's a rivalry game. I think they call that the Cy-Hawk Trophy that you win. But they lost. They're not going to have their quarterback. They're not going to have their running back due to that betting scandal that's popped up this offseason. They've lost other players, so their depth is going to be really weak. So that Iowa State game goes from really competitive, potential loss, to Iowa should be a pretty decent favorite there. Then, like I said, right, the Big Ten conference schedule for them is soft. They play Rutgers from the East, which is great for them. Nebraska, Northwestern, another Big Ten team that's had some scandal.
That's another team, along with Notre Dame. I just, whenever I see Northwestern on my screen, I want them to lose.
Well, you get a lot more losses out of them, that's for sure. They are going to be extremely bad this year. They might win 1 or 2 games. Like, I think their total has to be 2.5. If I remember correctly, it's something like 2.5 or 3. And I'm inclined to go under, but I didn't feel good enough to talk about that today. So, ultimately, Iowa's schedule is just so soft. They have a lot of veterans. Their defense is super stout, so they're not going to lose games they shouldn't. And so thus, the over 8 feels like a really good bet for me, even as dirty as I feel saying that and bringing up Iowa twice in one segment.
Northwestern's win total right now at DraftKings Sportsbook is over under 3 wins.
Yeah.
So they'd have to get 4.
I don't know how they get there.
Yeah, they'd have to get 4 for you to lose that under. Like a 3 a push, like, sure. Maybe they luck something out. I just can't wait to see like 80% of sports journalists have to cope with them being fucking terrible. I love it.
Yeah, and they will be terrible. It's just a mess. They're with their coaches gone, and every player has free reign, or at least did have free reign to transfer without any penalty, I believe. The thing was, it came out, yeah, okay, well, anybody can transfer it without any penalty because of the issues that popped up with hazing. And it didn't move the needle at all for anybody, because everybody's like, well, they're not really the greatest, so I don't really want any of their players. So their team is going to be uninspiring. And their academics are super difficult that hold them back. Their facilities, I don't believe, are the greatest. So they've got a lot of things going against them that just makes things very difficult for them to be a consistent winner.
All right, so we have Iowa over, Auburn under. Let's throw one more on. What do you got?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned it earlier. Utah, typically a great team. They've run into some issues with injuries that have me very scared about their overall performance. So this year in the Rose Bowl, January 1st, Cam Rising, their really good older quarterback, tore his ACL. And apparently all the different quarterbacks are getting torn ACLs and recovering in time for the season. But Rising they've said a lot of different things about how they're doubting how likely he is to be playing in week 1. They also play Florida week 1. So, usually I'm thinking, okay, well, a decent matchup, but with Rising, they're fine. Now an average Florida team has a real shot at beating Utah in the season opener, mixed with Brant Keithy, who is injured and potentially out. If you don't know who he is a very versatile tight end. He was better than Dalton Kincaid, and Dalton Kincaid, I believe, was a first-round pick. But Keithy, I believe, also tore his ACL, so he missed most of last season. So they're not sure if he's going to be back. So I am very concerned about how quickly they turn around, how quickly they're good when he is back. In terms of Cam Rising's backup, his backup got seriously injured in their first full day of tackling quarterbacks last week. So that is a major issue. So they're pretty much running on their 3rd or 4th string quarterback until Rising is healthy. I don't really see them as having any surefire losses. And they have a bunch of tough games at Oregon State, at USC, at Washington. I believe they play Florida on a neutral site, and they play Baylor at Baylor early. Baylor is a solid team that should win 8 to 9 games. So that's not a pushover team at all. So getting to 9, which it's under 8.5, getting to 9 feels like a pretty steep ask, considering we're not even sure when Rising will be back.
Do you have anything for week 1? Because based on what you just said, I just went and looked at it. Florida +7 over Utah. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that's not a bad option at all. It's a Thursday game, which will be fun. You get some midweek juice. Everybody likes that, right?
Done. I'm in.
Yeah, it's such a tough sell. Looking at some of the different ones, I think isn't Colorado like the most bet on over? I think Colorado is the most bet on over under win total this offseason. I like TCU covering against them. I think that number's 20.5. And then, I mentioned how bad Virginia's going to be. I think Tennessee is going to try to just prove any doubters wrong in the first game. They're 4 touchdown favorites against UVA. I could see them easily winning by 40. So those are some of the different earlier ones in the season that I like. It should be a fun first week. We get some good Sunday and Monday games too in week 1, which is kind of a classic college football move.
I got to give a shout out to my main man Adonis, Adon7X on Twitter, because I always like to, if I'm going to bet on college football, I'll be tailing you now that we've just talked about Florida and TCU. Always like to tail him as well. He gave me UTEP -1 against Jacksonville State in like one of the very first games of the college football season. So I will be betting that one as well. So it's not bad. Can you tell me about Colorado? Is this a disaster, or is Deion going to be like really good?
This is going to be a disaster, I think. And not because I don't think Deion's any good. I think Deion's a great coach, an incredible recruiter, but they have the most turnover, I think, like ever in college football. Their defense was horrible last year, and they lost a lot of different players. What they brought in didn't really make up for what they lost. And this is like, they make USC's defense look like Bama of the 2000s. It's just such a bad defense. I will say their offensive talent's really intriguing, but I think anybody that's watched any of the spring game and some of the different practices of Colorado, the big thing that you hear is that they're just small. They're not a big team. People worry about how they're going to be in the trenches, how they're going to cover bigger receivers, that type of thing. And that defense is absolutely atrocious. Last year, I think it felt like every single game, the spread was like 30 plus points, and it felt like they never covered. I don't know. That's anecdotal, but it did feel that way for a while. And I just think Deion is going to struggle in year 1. I think year 2, year 3, he'll be really good, because I just think he's a very good coach. He obviously connects with the players and the kids, and he can sway them to get to come. And I think he did a good job of getting guys drafted, which is always great at Jackson State. So I think at Colorado, we're going to need a year or 2 before they see more than 5 or 6 wins.
All right. Chris Kay, tell everyone where they can check out your content weekly during the college football season.
Yeah, so I'm doing a bunch of different things this offseason and now in season, Burning the Red Shirt podcast. But really the big thing I'm spending my time on this fall is between Campus to Canton, which is more written content, and Unabated. So if you haven't heard of unabated.com, it's an incredible site, tons of different tools to help you bet. I will say these picks were not reflections of what they would recommend. What's really cool about Unabated is we give you tools to help you determine the best edges across all the different sports books, because it feels like there's 100 of them now. Kind of a teach a man how to fish rather than just give him fish as well. Allows you to kind of figure out the best bets for you and the best edges throughout every single day. So I would say our college football content is going to be huge there. The big thing in college football, I don't know if you know this, Pat, but there is 0 rules about announcing injuries. So I think Schefter said last week it's the first time he ever saw an or on a depth chart. I don't think I've ever seen a depth chart that didn't have at least 1 or. I've seen 4 ors on a depth chart for a position, and I've seen guys think, hey, this guy's gonna be super healthy, super good to go for this game, and then he shows up in sweatpants, and I have no idea about it. So at Unabated, we're gonna have all the breaking news. We have a team of 3 or 4 different guys that have done this for years and years and years with great ROIs, playing DFS and props and things like that. And that injury news will really help you understand what props to bet, what games are going to give you your best edges. How impactful is a Dylan Gabriel injury compared to a Cade McNamara injury? Things like that are going to be some of the different things that we provide for you over at Unabated.
Hey, you can say hi to my buddy Ben Kramer, Pete Jennings, Rufus, all over at unabated.com as well. So go check it out right now. Smash the like while you're here, by the way. Don't break your screen doing it. You can just caress the like button. That's good enough for me. Caress the subscribe button to Mayo Media Network as well. Or if you just prefer audio podcasts, get this show in audio form on the Pat Mayo Experience audio feed. If you're feeling generous, 5-star review would go a long way. We talked about tools at the Unabated. If you want NFL tools for both DFS and betting, runthesims.com. We'll have all of that for you. Code Mayo to get 10% off over there. Thank you all for watching. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!